Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Podcast Boys. I am one of your hosts, Connor Nielsen, and joining me, as always, on his very own channel, it's the Comics Kid 2099. How are you doing, Comics Kid?
I'm doing very well, Connor, and yourself?
I'm a little sleepy, but I'm overall pretty darn good. Today we're talking about Evolution, which is a 2001 film directed by Ivan Reitman. If you are new to this show, we talk about movies and TV shows that feature alumni from Twin Peaks. This film features David Duchovny, who played the character of Agent Denise Bryson, I think Bryson, from Twin Peaks, the original series, and the revival. Why don't you, Comics Kid, tell us a little bit about Evolution?
Have you seen Ghostbusters?
Yep.
It's Ghostbusters. I made an offhand comment about that last we spoke when we were when I was picking this, and I didn't know that this was an Ivan Reitman film, but I thought, this kind of looks like it's going for that irreverent, supernatural, paranormal type thing interacting with a bunch of regular Joes kind of thing, like a spiritual successor to Ghostbusters, but it is exactly that. Ivan Reitman is basically just trying to recreate Ghostbusters. We can kind of get into that if you want. I know you didn't come to Ghostbusters until you were an adult, but like the first two Ghostbusters movies are childhood favorites of mine, and so like this was a weird situation for me. Like as soon as I popped it in, I went into this basically cold. Like I saw the cover, I was like, okay, I recognize these actors, and I can see, okay, there's like aliens or something, and I vaguely recall seeing commercials for this when it first came out, but I put it in, and then the credits roll, and I see Ivan Reitman's name, and I was like, oh, okay, and then I'm like, the whole time I'm watching this, I was thinking, I could just be watching Ghostbusters. So, that that's I guess I mean if you haven't seen Ghostbusters somehow, basically it's you've got a couple of scientists here. You've got Sean William Scott is a firefighter. You've got Julianne Moore who's a member of the CDC, and there's this meteor that crashes somewhere in Arizona, and then these reptilian type creatures evolve from the cells on the meteor, and then these guys have to stop these creatures from expanding and taking over the world. So Connor, what did you think of this movie?
I don't really like it, but it's like I acknowledge that the movie itself is just kind of forgettable and mediocre, and I just didn't really care.
Mhm.
I You're right. This is very much a Ghostbusters thing, but I was also picking up on a pretty big Men in Black influence.
Yeah.
Specifically, of course, this is dealing with aliens. Uh, just sort of more like production stuff, like the way the creatures looked, the reliant CGI. Um, Ted Levine is here, and he is kind of playing the guy from Ghostbusters who's trying to shut down the Ghostbusters, but he's also kind of like Agent Zed from Ghostbusters, the Rip Torn leader. So he kind of has a little bit of that energy where he's a kind of a old man with a funny voice. So you get a little bit of
Hmm.
that, but it is also yes, very much Ghostbusters. Uh, so this came out in 2001, and it's like the most 2001 movie you've ever seen in your life. It's so of its time, it's kind of mind-boggling. I watched a movie recently called Matchstick Men, which is like a Ridley Scott movie from 2003, and that movie is very 2003, but in a ways that I found kind of charming. And it wasn't like built to be an all-timer, but it's like a fun little time machine movie, so to speak. This one is like from 2001 in all the wrong ways. Like everything about 20 years ago that just haven't aged well is in this movie. It's like it's in spades. A lot of the humor here is cringeworthy, and I did not laugh a single time. But I did find the kind of science fiction concept of um, a meteorite crashing and then like whatever life is on that evolving at a very rapid pace to be somewhat interesting. And I do think some of the cast has a pretty good chemistry. But I'm glad I saw it, I guess, because I've seen that logo of like the smiley face with the three eyes like ever since this movie came out when I was like 5, almost 6. So I guess I'm glad I finally watched it. I always got this mixed up with the David Cronenberg movie Existence. I don't know why, but I did, and so I guess eventually I'm gonna have to watch that.
It's funny you say that because I always get this confused with Tremors, which I have never seen, but that's also about people in a smallish town fighting against monsters. And so I thought like for years I was getting these two movies kind of smushed together in my brain, but now that I've seen this, I'll probably, even though I haven't seen Tremors, I'll probably be able to keep them separate a little bit better in my head.
Yeah, yeah, same. So where do you want to get started with this? I guess first of all, what did you think of the movie overall?
I kind of, I guess I showed my hand a little bit earlier, but the whole time I kept thinking like, hey, Dan Aykroyd is playing the governor who wants to get rid of these monsters. This is kind of like Ghostbusters, where the mayor wants to get rid of these monsters, and like the whole time I was just thinking like, I could be watching a better movie than this. Like, I don't think I hated it as much as you did, but also I might give it another go and listen to the commentary. I'm kind of curious what the creative process was, if this is a situation where everyone was really proud of the movie they made, or if the commentary came years after the fact and they're kind of like, oh, okay. Like I've listened to some commentaries where the commentators are kind of watching it with a fresh pair of eyes, and they're not openly like railing against their movie, but you can tell that they're kind of maybe embarrassed by what they made. And so I might give it another watch just to hear the thoughts of everyone on the commentary. But I I didn't just love it, and I think if I had seen this when I was like 12, I might have really liked it. But I think for me also a lot of the humor didn't really work for me. Some of it I was like, okay, maybe this could have worked, but I was probably this came to me at the wrong point in my life.
Yeah, there's a couple of directions I think we could go, but I want to start off with like a bit of a, so I come across as a nitpick, but it keeps happening so often that it was one of the things I found most distracting about the movie. There are so many strange line readings in this movie. um, a lot of the actors in this I've seen in other things, and I know they're good actors. Like I know Ty Burrell is a good actor. Ted Levine is of course Buffalo Bill, so you know he's great. I just watched him in a movie the other day where he was pretty good. David Duchovny is kind of a reliable presence. I actually kind of enjoy Sean William Scott, even though I think he should be the most annoying person on planet Earth. He's not.
I agree.
Uh,
I think he might have been my favorite part of the movie, and I was going in expecting him to be like the I don't know. I've seen him in American Pie, and I remember, I mean, it's probably been 15 years since I've seen American Pie, but I remember hating him in that, and I was expecting to hate him here, but I agree. Something worked with him for
well,
me.
and I've not seen American Pie. My brother has. He hates that movie. And I remember. So I guess this is maybe like an embarrassing truth about me. I have seen the film Cop Out. It is the only
Hmm.
Kevin Smith film I've seen, and Sean William Scott is in that, and his character like trait is that he's annoying. But I didn't find him all that annoying in that movie. Like it was like so surreal to watch, like because he's got a very punchable face, just kind of naturally. Um, but it's sort of like a warped. Like, have you ever played like that game in Mario Party Facelift, where you have to like warp
Uh,
the person's face to like match the face in the middle of the screen?
yeah, yeah. Or I played a Wario
Okay,
version of
yeah,
that, but
yeah.
yeah.
Sean William Scott looks like a warped version of like Ashton Kutcher's face. Uh, so it's like he's handsome, but he's also like goofy looking, and you want to punch him. Anyways, but I actually think I like Sean William Scott, and I want to watch more of his more dramatic stuff. But um, the point I'm trying to get at is, if I had not seen any of these people in this movie before, I would just assume they're not very good actors. So I think in that way, I got to put a lot of the blame at Ivan Reitman's feet here, because I think about there's this one really weird part where um, the what's the guy's name? Not David Duchovny, Harry Block. Yeah,
Orlando.
Harry
Yeah.
Block. So he is either the guy in charge or not, because he's with the USGS, the United States like Geology Society, but then
Hmm.
David Duchovny's the head of science at a community college.
Yeah, um, I think David Duchovny is a professor, and then Harry Block. So if I'm just gonna go by actor names. That'll be easier for me. David Duchovny is a professor, and I think Orlando Jones says he's adjunct. So I think in terms of the university hierarchy, that's lower than being a full-on professor. But then I think Orlando Jones said he signed up to be part of the Geology Society online, and then he brought David Duchovny. I think didn't he say in case some real science needs to be done?
Okay.
So David Duchovny is more the brains of the operation, and then Orlando Jones is the one who's kind of throwing them into the adventure, if you
Okay.
will.
Um, but anyways, there's a scene where Orlando Jones is talking to Sean William Scott at a diner, and then he
Hmm.
asks Sean William Scott if he's gonna finish his bacon, and then Sean William Scott has this line like, "Yeah, I'm gonna finish my bacon. That's why I ordered it." And it's this
Hmm.
really weird like moment where he just gets like legitimately annoyed and angry with Orlando Jones, and like no other interaction in the rest of the movie between those two seems to like relate to any kind of hostility or animosity that would like maybe like clue into. But there's not just
Hmm.
like that one. That's like one that kind of stuck in my head. But like Julianne Moore, great actress. We watched her in Boogie Nights. She's gone on to win an Academy Award. She's a reliable actress, and there's like moments where her character just sort of will just say things, and they're delivered in such a odd way. And same thing with David Duchovny. I don't know if it's just like something that's wrong with the editing, and like there's just too much like time that they left in their clips before and after lines of dialogue. But it just seemed like there were these like weird pauses, and like those weird pauses kind of made for a really strange flow, and it just sort of sounded like everyone was just like delivering their lines strangely. So I don't know if you picked up on that, but that's like one of the, like I said, this might come across as like a minor point, but it kept poking its head out.
It felt to me like they were improving a lot of this, and I don't know if they were. I probably should have like gone through the commentary before we recorded, but it to me it did feel like what I've heard was kind of the process in the 2016 Ghostbusters, where we have a basic structure of a plot, but scene to scene, we're just going to let our actors kind of handle like getting us from point A to point B, and then actors are able to uh, they're able to take what's on paper and convey it with emotion and bring a certain, rise that material up a little bit, but they may not be good at coming up with dialogue necessarily. Some actors might transcend and become screenwriters of their own, or, I've heard Edward Norton, he like will, tweak dialogue quite a bit in some of his movies, but like this felt a lot like, that bacon scene. I wonder if that was like, hey guys, let's throw some, ad lib a little bit, throw some lines out there, and we'll see what works. And there might have been a lot of that from some of the scenes, and then some of it might have actually been scripted. So like a really weird one to me was when they were in the mall and they said, okay, where would this giant dinosaur pterodactyl thing be? And Orlando said, in the lingerie. And he said, or he might have said like, if you were a giant pterodactyl, where would you be? And Orlando Jones said lingerie. And he said, not you, the bird. Where would the bird be? And he said, no, lingerie. And then like it was in the women's clothing section because it had kidnapped a woman who was shoplifting. And so like that, I think the scene is supposed to be funny, but I'm over here like scratching my head like, why is the bird in lingerie? And like there, I get that it's supposed to be funny that like he's kind of sleazy, like he takes showers with the women's volleyball team and stuff like that. And like there's an embarrassing line where the U.S. military admits that they have tapped into their computers, and Orlando Jones says, all of those girls are over 18." And I was like, "Ugh, you don't have to say that. Like the fact that you said that makes me think that you're lying." And so like if you had just cut that line out of the movie, I wouldn't for one second have thought that these guys were pedophiles. But now that you have said that, it makes me question if they are. And so like what you said earlier about this movie hasn't aged well, that immediately jumped to my mind. And so a lot of the scenes, you're right, the dialogue feels weird, and I am wondering how much of that is on the script and how much of that was expecting the actors to come up with something. And, famously, a lot of the first Ghostbusters movie was improv by Bill Murray. And I wonder if Ivan Reitman just thought, well, it worked for Ghostbusters, let's do it again, even though David Duchovny may not operate in the same way that Bill Murray may, or Julianne Moore. These guys may not be like Bill Murray in how they approach something like this. And so maybe Ivan Reitman thought, well, that worked for me once and it became huge, so let's try it again. That's my guess.
Okay. I remember like the Julianne Moore line towards the end. She turns to David Duchovny when they think that they might die or whatever, and she says, "I'll tell you something." And then he says, "What?" And then she says, "I would have rocked your world." And I have no idea what the tone of that line is, because
Hmm.
is it supposed to be funny? Um, it's not funny because it's along the lines of something I expected her to say. Did was I expected to assume she was going to say "I love you" or something? Because in this movie, that's like just such kind of second tier sex jokes, like her sort of being blatant about her intentions. It's just so predictable at that point. But then she says it in such an earnest way, and the way the scene sort of plays it is it's like they're just sort of playing it like it is a normal dramatic scene. So I have no idea what the tone is. And again, that's just like another one of those. It's like a line delivery that just comes across as odd. But you're right, the improv element. I was unaware about that with Ghostbusters, and I think you might be onto something because I feel like when David Duchovny and Orlando Jones are talking with one another, it's like they're completely different characters than when they're interacting with other people.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of like a good like in the when they're alone in the underground cave and Orlando Jones is kind of acting wacky and goofy, and then when they're with like I don't like when they're with the scene you talked about when he said, "Are you going to finish the bacon?" Orlando Jones is like opening up like his hopes and dreams, like I was hoping this would lead to more to a total stranger, and so like it is a weird like the character doesn't feel consistent throughout the whole movie.
Yes. So you would mention that line, like that he talks about being the volleyball coach. So he is the volleyball coach, and he's kind of talks about how that's like a sort of like a passion of his. Um,
Hmm.
and then when he's at the game, he's really into it. He's a very vocal coach. He's kind of yelling at his team to do it. And then when he's with Sean William Scott, uh, he seems so matter of fact about seeing college age volleyball girls undressing and showering that it almost seems like he doesn't even view it as like a sex thing. Like it's just so that like it goes over his head. That's how like I was reading it because he's like, oh, what do you like? Because Sean William Scott seems to be the joke is that he just sees it as like a normal everyday banal thing, and Sean William Scott is like, bro, volleyball players,
Hmm.
man, what? But then every other scene with Orlando Jones, you're right, he just kind of comes across as a horn dog, and so I don't know what who he is. And similarly, David Duchovny, when he's hanging out with Orlando Jones, is Mister. He's David Duchovny, where he's kind of got some swagger. He fancies himself a ladies' man, and kind of does his like he kind of like he and Orlando Jones have their kind of banter where they do, the friends wonder, but also kind of give each other a hard time. But then when he talks to anybody else, he like just will be completely normal and polite to them. You almost expect him to be like the Bill Murray character who is just like always giving everybody a hard time. But then there's like
Hmm.
because I'm thinking about the part where they roll up to the army base for the first time, and he's just saying, "Hello, sir. How are you? My name is Ira Kane. It is good to meet you." And like he's saying, like it's so cordial, like you almost expect it to be like a joke where he's like talking down and infantilizing the people he's talking to, but that's not the joke. There is no joke. He's just talking to them like they're normal people. And so it's just sort of weird that when it's a scene where it's just the two of them together, he's a David Duchovny character, and then in most other scenes, he's like a pretty bland, normal person leading man.
Yeah. And I think there's like we could just about like come up with like different examples of that for all the characters. Like scene to scene, things seem like weird and inconsistent. Or like, hey, here's our introduction to this character. Okay, here's how this character is going to be, and then like we're just thrown for a loop. The rug is pulled out from under us every time. And it's one thing if your character is like going through a change throughout the movie. That's to be expected. But when you can't even get a grasp on who the character is in order to see and determine what that change is, that is a problem.
Yes. So I guess to get off that point, you had mentioned that you thought Sean William Scott was maybe the best character in the movie, and I think I would agree with you. I don't think he even needs to be here though, and that's kind of the weird part because his story is so apart and separated from everything else. And then at the end of it, like there's Ethan Suplee, from My Name Is Earl, is one of
Hmm.
um, David Duchovny's students, and he's just as involved in the film's climax as Sean William Scott. So I don't know why they didn't just make Sean Williams. They could have just combined all of these characters into Sean William Scott.
Yeah.
And so I don't know why Sean William Scott character is so distant. And then similarly, I saw a bit of trivia on Amazon while I was watching this that the Julianne Moore character, she's always like falling over and tripping and dropping stuff, and she's kind of clumsy. And I guess that was a choice made by Julianne Moore, and I can't blame her because without that kind of like occasional gag, there's nothing to her character.
Yeah. And that also, like, in the one of the introductory scenes for her, they're at the courtroom, and she is, so it's Dave Duchovny and Orlando Jones against Ted Levine, Ty Burrell, and Julianne Moore. And basically, the government is trying to shut out these two who discovered this scientific phenomena, and she deposes David Duchovny and basically like embarrasses him, humiliates him in front of everyone, and reveals that he's like his days as a serious scientist are behind him. And then like David Duchovny is like walking out of the courtroom clearly defeated, and then Orlando Jones is like, "She really wants you, man." And I was like, "What?" And David Duchovny is also like, "What?" And he's like, "Yeah, just because she's like embarrassed you in front of, like, yeah, she totally wants you." And then like if it wasn't for that like bit of dialogue, and I guess we're supposed to believe uh, Orlando Jones there. If it wasn't for that dialogue, I wouldn't have known that she has an attraction to David Duchovny. And then, like later on, they're at the hotel that she's staying at, and David Duchovny asks her. They're in the lobby, and David Duchovny says, "Could you ever be attracted to me?" And I'm like, where did this come from? These two have barely spent any time together in this movie, but because Orlando Jones said that like she wants him bad, like it's weird. It's hard for me to explain, but like David Duchovny spends more time with the other Ghostbusters in the movie than he does her, and then at the end these two go to have sex, and I'm like, but they've spent like 10 minutes with each other on screen, like total in this entire story that takes place over a couple of days. These two have spent like 10 minutes together, and so it's one of those things where like I think they think that there's more. It's like you said, there's nothing going on with this character, but they think there's more going on with her, and there's more going on here with this love story.
Yeah, the romance here I think is the weakest element. It seems very obligatory. It does sort of feel like, yeah, I mean, of course, the Ghostbusters parallels are so apparent. It's a Ghostbusters ripoff almost 20 years later, by the same guy, and it feels
Mm-hmm.
very Venkman and Dana Barrett. Um,
Yeah.
and I, but it doesn't have that same kind of charm because those two characters in Ghostbusters at least spent more time together. Because at
Yeah.
least like Bill Murray's a bit of a sleazebag in Ghostbusters, and he's always chasing women. He's chasing Dana from the start. With this, he wants nothing to do with Julianne Moore at the start of it, and because like his friends give him a hard enough time, and I guess because she looks like Julianne Moore and he looks like David Duchovny, they kind of fall for each other. I guess I don't know. It's weird.
And if this was like a romantic comedy, like I think we've talked about this a little bit before, you have like a weird, like a typical romantic comedy would be these two characters meet each other at the beginning of the movie and they hate each other. And then like throughout the movie, they end up bumping into each other constantly. And like at the hotel, David Duchovny would see her at the front desk and he would say, "Oh, great, her." Or like they'd be at the restaurant and she would walk in and she'd be like, "Oh no, this guy." But then throughout the movie, they're, for reasons whatever, they are forced to interact and work together, and they gradually become closer. And then, about the halfway point, Orlando Jones would say, "I think she likes you." And David Duchovny would be like, "What? No." And then by the end of the movie, they kiss, and it feels earned. But because this movie has got to set up we've got to have a funny scene where someone puts some forceps up Orlando Jones's butt, and we have to have a funny scene where they throw shampoo inside an alien butthole, and like we don't have time for a genuine human moment between these two.
Yeah, you were talking about a rom-com, and I recently just watched the 2020 film adaptation of the Jane Austen novel Emma.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've watched any versions of Emma or if you're familiar with the book.
I've seen the Kate Beckin. I've seen part of the Kate Beckinsale one.
Okay, this one has Anya Taylor-Joy, which is the reason I watched it. But I mean, come on, give me a break, everybody. She's Anya Taylor-Joy. We all love her. So, anyways, the the that movie was delightful, and it is a pretty standard romantic comedy. I'd say like it, is maybe one of the stories that sort of laid the foundation of the formula. And that movie does end with Emma getting together with her neighbor who she's known for years, but they've never really seen each other as like love interests for one another. They kind of have a bit of an antagonistic friendship. They're always kind of giving each other a hard time. But then, even though that story has so many characters and like several plots that it's juggling, and like an attraction doesn't even develop between the two of them until like into the second half. Something about like because that world is built around relationships and people trying to, it's almost like fun as you're trying to track the characters to figure out who's going to get together with who, and that's sort of where the plot dynamics lie. This is, as you said it, like it's there's an alien like threat that's developing. There's like conflict between the government and this, these scientists at a community college. We have to like establish their jobs as people who work with the college students. We need to have Sean William Scott. We need to have action scenes. We need to have jokes about butts. Like it's just like there's a lot kind of going on, and the relationship aspect of it feels so kind of hackneyed and thrown in at the last minute. Like it almost feels like the Julianne Moore character was maybe not written to be a lady, and then they decided kind of in the 11th hour to cast Julianne Moore, and then kind of quickly make we got to have somebody end up with Julianne Moore.
And part of the problem may also be so. I was also reading some trivia on this movie, and the original screenwriter was Don Jacoby, and he conceived this to be like a serious science fiction thriller, and then Ivan Reitman came on and said, no, we're going to make this be funny, and so he hires David Diamond and David Wiseman, so we have a whole bunch of D names here, and he wants this to be more of a comedy movie, and then apparently like everyone was on board with that, but I'm wondering how much of this like is suffering from structural changes that they made. Like once Ivan Reitman comes in and says we're going to change the concept of this movie, how much of the movie suffers because of that? Like like you said, it might have been a guy who's at the CDC and there is no relationship between him and Dave Duchovny, and then they come in and say, well, we need to have a romance angle just like Ghostbusters. Okay, Julianne Moore. It very easily could have been that. We don't know, but you saying that makes me think. I can picture it in my mind. I'm like, yeah, that sounds like that could have happened.
Is there anything you wanted to tackle?
There's scenes in the movie that like going back to like this is let's just let our actors improv a little bit. Like there's a scene at the restaurant where David Duchovny, we find out he used to date Sarah Silverman, and then he's like there's this whole bit about how like she's on a date with a cop and he's like, hey officer, she stole some of my shirts, what isn't that against the law? And she gets mad and was like trying to take off her shirt to give back to him, and I'm just like sitting there like I'm sitting alone watching this, and I am embarrassed for everyone in this movie. I'm embarrassed for myself for watching this movie. Like, it's not funny. I don't know. Like, it kind of, I don't, maybe this could have worked in a different way, but like, if you had David Duchovny as like, like if you set up a scene where like Orlando Jones borrows his stapler and doesn't give it back, and David Duchovny is like super anal retentive and obsessive about like my desk has to be perfect, give me back my stapler, and then he sees her and he just like he's seeing red and it's like she took my Monday and Tuesday shirts, we've got to get her. I don't know, like that sounds stupid in my head, but like maybe it would have been better than what we got. Like I don't know.
That scene struck me as strange as well. Because it's I checked the timestamp. That's about an hour into the movie, and it was like a weird piece of backstory to add to David Duchovny's character that is not relevant at all.
Right.
Because Sarah Silverman never comes back. His prior relationship it weighs nothing on his current budding relationship with Julianne Moore. Him sort of giving her a hard time about taking shirts. You were talking about improv. It feels like an improvised scene, but I don't think it could have been because
they would have hired Sarah Silverman to be there.
Was Sarah Silverman just shooting her TV show like up the road, like, and like just was hanging out with Ivan Reitman because she's a comedian and he makes comedy movies? Like what? Like it's just like kind of baffling, and it's not like they needed that to make it feature length. It's so weird.
Speaking of like I know we're jumping all over the place, and my mind is kind of scattered right now. I'm just trying to like hit up all the scenes where like we're talking about this weird scene that doesn't make sense to me. So there's a scene when the military has already set up camp at the site where they have already gone a couple times to like check out the meteor, and they get there and there's a soldier who says, "You're the Professor Ira Kane," and the soldier is like about to get his gun out and shoot him, and then the other soldiers are having to restrain him. And Orlando Jones says, "What was that all about?" And David Duchovny says, "I don't know." And that also doesn't show up again. And I was confused. I was like, "Okay, you've got to explain that to me, Spooty." And then they don't. And so, like, did I miss something? Why is a soldier that we've never seen before trying to shoot David Duchovny?
Yeah, because then he says, "You," and then like he's gonna like say what he did. He's like, "You weren't did this." It's like so. It's like it's indistinct, and just sort of
Hmm.
like it's like yeah, no, that struck me as very kind of odd as well. Yeah, so the movie's like structure is not very good, I don't think, because first of all, it's filled with like weird moments that I think, and I'm not just talking about, like odd scenes that could be cut or character backstory that just kind of gets brought up and dropped. Um, oh wait, hold on, was that guy who was going to shoot David Duchovny, was he one of the soldiers who had gotten one of his vaccines? Is that the implication?
Maybe that, and I mean, we're just now. That makes sense. You said that, and now I'm thinking about it. That makes a lot of sense, but they probably should have made that a little more clear because
Yes, no, you're
before
right.
you
And
said,
I didn't put one and one together until right now.
well, and like before, for anyone who's listening who hasn't seen the movie, in the courtroom scene, we find out that David Duchovny had worked for the Pentagon, and he had come up with like an anti anthrax vaccine, but then it gave soldiers like it was like deformed their faces, gave them diarrhea, erectile dysfunction. It was like all this stuff that was a symptom of and they called it the Kane madness. Maybe, but like that guy didn't look deformed in the face, and like before you said that, I was thinking like maybe he was one of his students and he like failed, and it's like, well, I couldn't go into veterinarian school, so I guess I'm gonna have to be a soldier. Like I don't
Mhm.
have any other life skills like set up, and but then like he's already set up as being a really laid back professor. Like he gave a C minus to some students for writing like a first grade level paragraph on their report, and so like I mean that's something that would have gotten them like a failure easily, but he's like super laid back. Like he gave everyone else A pluses on their
Yes.
papers. So I was thinking like, well, it can't be that he failed this guy. So why is it like it could have been like I'm thinking of Venkman from Ghostbusters, how he's like trying to sleep with co-eds, and he's like I could very easily see like some police officer being like, "That's Peter Venkman. He failed me in college. Like, get him." And that would work with Peter Venkman. But like, I think you're right. That might be the what the movie is going for. But then, like you said, or like we were saying, like they mentioned facial deformities being part of the Kane madness, and so I don't know if that is what it's going for.
So that's how we're introduced to David Duchovny that way, and he's so laid back. He gives everybody an A except for, and they're stupid because they're so fat. Except for two fat students who he gives C minuses to for, as you said, like kindergarten level like paragraph, and that's their essay. And then after that, they discover the meteorite that crashed down. I'm confused why they were able to visit the crash site like 3 times
Hmm.
before the government even showed up. So the local authorities were already there, and I'm
Right.
assuming it's a matter of days because they go 2 or 3 times
Hmm.
to see it. Because they go one time by themselves, they come back a second time with students, and then the third time they come, it's with that's when the government's already there.
Hmm.
So was this 3 days in a row that they've gone? Like, why did it take the government so long to get there? Um, and uh, and so then and this is for the people listening, once the government shows up, that's where we're introduced to Ted Levine as sort of the primary antagonist against, who's kind of standing as an obstacle in the way of um, Orlando Jones and David Duchovny. And then that's also where we meet Julianne Moore's character, who works for the CC. And so a lot of the early drama comes from the government trying to steal ownership of this discovery away from them, and or like trying to cover up that this was ever found, or I don't even really know what. All I know is that all the kind of samples they've taken and all the stuff that they've been keeping at their labs at the community college have been ransacked, and they're covering it up. And David Duchovny and Orlando Jones are saying, "No, we discovered this. We want credit. We want all this and all that." And then all of that drama early on just sort of evaporates because the plot then has to take a hold, and the plot is at the crash site, around the crash site. I guess there was like some kind of life form on the rocket, and it's a bunch of single-celled organisms that are evolving at an incredibly fast rate. Like they're like in a matter of hours, those cells are able to evolve that took life on Earth 2 billion years to achieve. And so that's sort of like, I guess, the premise of the movie. So I guess structurally the problem is a lot of it is just a premise sort of building on itself and sort of expanding for an hour, and then in the last half an hour, we realize that now there's a conflict because now life has evolved into these weird alien primates, and it's going to take over like the atmosphere that these creatures live. These are nitrogen-based life forms as opposed to carbon-based life forms, and it's eventually just going to spread and take over the world in a matter of months. So we need to find out a way to stop it. And so it is just sort of a premise with some like lame jokes thrown in and slapstick for an hour, and then at the very end, the last half an hour, they devise a plot to try to end it. And so I just think as a structure, it doesn't work very well as a comedy.
You're right. It would be like if Ghostbusters was the library is haunted, and there are more ghosts popping up just at the library, and Venkman, Egon, and Ray, they go to the library a few times, and then Walter Peck and the mayor, like, block these guys, and they're like, we're going to take you three to court because we want to go to the library. And so then, like, there's a courtroom scene, and then, like, you get, like, 2 action scenes in the movie, and the first one is, like, an hour or 10 minutes in or whatever. Like, that's what it feels like. There's a lot of weird... It almost feels like this was, like, a micro-budget movie made by somebody who has some cool ideas, but they don't really... It's not refined, and they don't have someone there to say... Generally, it would be a good idea if you did this at the half-hour mark, and if you kind of built up to this point here, and then you did this afterwards. Like, we need someone here to kind of hold your idea man's hand, and I mean, it's crazy to say that because by this point, this was, like you said, nearly 20 years after Ghostbusters. Ivan Reitman should have known what he was doing, and, like, it's so crazy to me. Like, I think they think that, like, the weird hijinks, like, let's have a scene where, there's a little mosquito thing that gets inside Orlando Jones, and it's almost like giving birth, except it's more violent and disgusting, and, like, it pains me just thinking about it. And, like, let's have that scene, and it's like, that'll tide people over. But, like, if you're selling this as it's Ghostbusters but with aliens, and I was getting that vibe before I even knew that Ivan Reitman was involved with this movie, if you're selling it as that, then people are going to want to see this group of people fighting aliens. On the cover of the movie, I think they're holding guns. And so, like, there is a scene where they're at the mall and they all have shotguns. And I remember looking at the clock, and it's like, this movie is an hour 40, and it was over an hour when that scene happened. And, like, structurally, you would want that to be, like, the 20 or 30 minute mark in a movie like this, I would think.
Yes, and that's a very strange scene that just sort of comes out of nowhere as well, because more and more life forms, because so the meteorite falls to Earth, and it falls into the underground, into an underground cavern, and there's a bit of like a cave system. They're in Arizona, and so aliens and weird creatures start popping up in people's houses and at country clubs and all over the place, and these creatures sort of burrowed up from the underground caves, and then they quickly start dying because they are nitrogen-based life forms. The oxygen is killing them. And then there's like a whole bunch of weird-looking dinosaur dragon-looking creatures that they discover a whole like field of them dead. They're these winged creatures, and they've all died. And then one of them just sort of hawks up a larva, and then it is an oxygen pollen dragon, basically, alien dragon, and it goes to the mall, and that's where David Duchovny, Sean William Scott, and Orlando Jones get their shotguns to take it out. And it's like the big action set piece. But the organisms becoming like oxygen tolerant. You think that's the big twist? Oh, the stakes have been raised. Now we have to deal with these things that can breathe. But then all of a sudden, that's not the case, right? Like now it's the nitrogen cloud, or like the environment of these things, it's now just going to grow and take over the world. So what was the point of even having this like this alien that's able to breathe oxygen and like kill people? It's probably there to have like a traditional action scene, and it might be the best part of the movie, but it is completely incongruous with the rest of the story.
I have said this before, and I don't know, maybe you're getting tired of hearing me say it. This would have worked better as a TV series, I think, where like you've got like you would be able to really explore the conflict of like here's your like anti-establishment university guys, and then here's the government coming in and stepping on their toes, and then they all have to work together because like this is a permanent hotbed of like alien activity is going to constantly be popping in. Kind of like in Buffy, you had the Hellmouth, where it's like this is a locale where like weird stuff is going to happen, and you need to constantly be on the watch for like werewolf substitute teachers or whatever. Something kind of like that, but sci-fi, where it's like this thing crashed here, and now we have no way of like combating it, so we're just going to have to be on the lookout. And then you could kind of slowly develop your romance between Julianne Moore and David Duchovny. You could slowly chip away at, okay, here's what's eating at David Duchovny concerning Ted Levine. You could build a legitimate friendship between Sean William Scott, Orlando Jones, and David Duchovny. I feel like, of course, that would have been really expensive. And I have to say, I don't know how expensive this movie was. The CGI doesn't look great now. I thought a lot of it looked kind of bad. Like, there are times where it's clearly just a rubber creature. Like, when Sean William Scott carries in a creature and lays it on the table, I'm like, okay, that is clearly made out of rubber. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with practical effects. Sometimes it doesn't look great, but then in this case, the CGI doesn't look great. So you're left with two options, and neither one will look great. But I think a lot of the CGI here, to me, looks really fake 20 years later. Maybe it looked a lot better to people in the time, but I'm sure if you were going to do a TV series, you would have to really be judicious with how you spread your money out. And like, are you going to have a big special effects heavy action scene each episode, or are you going to have it be mostly character based, and then occasionally there's a big action scene in the season? You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know. I think like looking at everything this movie tries to do, a lot of it based on what you just said about like this dragon suddenly is able to breathe and now we have to kill it, and then another thing happens, might have worked a little better if this was an episodic thing where it's like, okay, in this episode now this thing is like given birth to a dragon and it can breathe our atmosphere, and then in this episode now we've got apes, and now we've got a giant whatever this thing is. It probably wouldn't have worked in the early 2000s. I don't think they would have been able to pull that off as a TV show, but I'm just thinking of like everything that they're trying to do with the characters here. I feel like would have worked a little better if it was more of an ongoing thing.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little hesitant to and maybe it's because I just don't watch TV. So
right.
I think like I could see it kind of working out as like that sort of episodic. Here's a group of 3 people, trying to like in this episode they'll fight a new alien, and each episode the aliens get a little more wacky, a little more evolved. Or I could see it kind of going the other way where it is just so procedural, and it's not a comedy and it's like a drama. And I would be able to see that. Like that would be like Steven Soderbergh's Evolution, would be something like that. But I think that there was enough here to like make it work in the time they had. I just don't think they made it work.
I agree. I know we've been all over the place, but I don't know if I have a whole lot else to say about this movie. Maybe other people really liked it. I feel like this is one of those movies that apparently it bombed. It did not do well financially, but I'm going to say the people who did like it probably really liked it when it came out and probably haven't given it much thought since then.
Yeah, I know that I remember seeing this DVD all the time at the video store. And like Ghostbusters, it does try selling itself on a bit of a mascot, like that smiley face with the 3 eyeballs. I feel like
which is
weird
because
yeah.
But that smiley face doesn't show up until literally the credits are about to roll. Like
they're in the fire truck, and then like the smiley face is like it jumps out at the screen, and then credits. And I was like, what? I guess that's supposed to be like the ghost giving the peace sign thing, but like in Ghostbusters, that was an actual logo that they introduced like a third of the way into the movie.
Yeah.
But here, like this thing, it's on the cover, but it shows up out of nowhere in the movie.
And then,
So
yeah, after the smiley face with the three eyeballs, the movie literally ends on an ad for Head and Shoulders shampoo.
which was apparently Jason Reitman's idea. I don't know how old Jason Reitman was when this came out, but I'm assuming he like heard his dad talking about the movie and was like, "Hey, you should do this," and then he did that. And I mean, it's about as funny as the rest of the movie. So if the humor works for you in the movie, then maybe you'll like it. You said you didn't laugh once. I laughed a couple of times. I did like whenever the one guy gets eaten by the creature on the golf course and Sean William Scott kind of like has to suppress a smile. I thought that was kind of funny. And then later, he has the creature wrapped up in a tarp and he's meeting them at the university and they said, "Oh, what's this? Another blow-up doll?" Like, I thought that was kind of funny. It's one of those things where like, I don't know, like, I wasn't just laughing I wasn't tears coming out of my eyes. Like, there's different levels of laughter. It was more of a, that's kind of funny. Like, I wasn't just rolling on the floor laughing with this movie. There were a couple of kind of funny moments for me.
Yeah, and I guess I should say, I didn't laugh, but I wasn't avidly hating myself while I was watching it like I do in the worst comedies. But I quickly did want to jump back and say that I'm with you on the CGI. I think that some of your stuff with the little worms looks okay for its time. But then the longer it goes on and the more elaborate the CGI gets, the worse. It's not that it's bad, it's that there's just a lot of it. And it is a lot. I will say, though, I do think the creatures are kind of cool looking.
I did want to say I was reading the trivia while watching the movie, and I came across a piece that I actually laughed out loud at. David Duchovny turned down a role in Star Wars Episode II: Attack of the Clones to appear in this movie.
Well, he made the right decision, I'd say.
Well, yeah, and that's a weird thing. Like, if he had been in Attack of the Clones, like, I do think that is a much worse movie, but also, would he be getting more residual checks from that than he would be from Evolution? I don't know. And so financially, I don't know if he would have been better off, but I definitely think, like, I think turning down a role in one of the Star Wars prequels would probably be a better choice. I don't think those movies are very good, but I'm questioning who he would have played. Like, would he have been Anakin?
Well,
Because
I don't know, because he's considerably older than Hayden Christensen.
Yeah, and like he wouldn't have been Obi-Wan because Obi-Wan was still Ewan McGregor. The only other like new character who was introduced in that was Count Dooku, who's Christopher Lee. And so you couldn't have done like David Duchovny as Liam Neeson's mentor before, Obi-Wan was born or whatever. So like
what if he was Jango Fett?
Now that could be. That's probably it because I forget that Jango Fett was even in that movie. But I was just trying to think, like, who are all the characters who were introduced in that movie? But I saw that trivia, and I laughed out loud, and I actually asked no one, since I was by myself, who would he have played? And, it could have been Jango Fett, because like you said, he's much older than Hayden Christensen, and I doubt that unless they came up with the idea that Dooku was Liam Neeson's mentor earlier in the movie, then it probably was Jango. Yeah. So that I thought that was kind of interesting, though.
Yeah, no, that's good to know. I can just imagine the idea of seeing David Duchovny in a Star Wars prequel just sounds insane to me. But quick question: this is again, sorry everybody, we're backtracking. Why did they go to court? Like, what was the purpose of going to court? Because they were, because was that when? Do David Duchovny and Orlando Jones, do they sue Ted Levine, Ty Burrell, and Julianne Moore early on, or are they getting sued? They're in court, and it seems to be that the aim of Julianne Moore and company is to discredit David Duchovny by revealing his backstory.
I think so. It's a weird thing where it's like you have like when David Duchovny and Orlando Jones get there. Then Ted Levine says, "We promise we will keep you in the loop." And then Orlando Jones and David Duchovny get mad, and then Ted Levine says, "Escort these men off the premises." And then Orlando Jones and David Duchovny says, "This isn't over. We're going to fight you on this." And then it cuts to a courtroom scene, and then we find out about the Kane madness. So I think it's that David Duchovny and Orlando Jones are mad that they have been kept out of the loop on their discovery. But the problem is, Ted Levine said he would keep them in the loop. And then they argue, and then the next thing you know, they're being escorted off the premises. So I'm confused. Like, is it that David Duchovny knows this guy and he says, well, he says he will keep us in the loop, but he's lying because I've worked with him before and I know how he works. And if that's the case, then he should have said that at some point in the movie. But because the way it plays is, yeah, you guys will be part of this operation, but then I think they're thinking, well, we want it to be like Ghostbusters, and the Ghostbusters guys, they weren't really on the side of Walter Peck, so we can't have these guys be on the side of Ted Levine. So courtroom drama for 5 minutes, and then courtroom drama. And so, like, then at that point, the government, I guess, is like, well, if these guys win, then we are forced to leave this site. And so now we have to reveal the Kane madness so that we can keep hold of this, of the...
I'm just sort of confused then, like, what his backstory has to do with anything. Like, it's to discredit him so they can keep him out of the loop? But how does that change that it's their discovery? Like, I don't, like, that's all confusing to me. And, like, the way that scene is set up is Ted Levine makes a snide comment about the facilities at the community college, and then the judge says, well, the facilities were very nice when I attended that community college. And then that judge, being a former student of that college, is relevant not at all, because it's just a weird detail.
And you could say, like, well, that judge probably went to that community college like 50 years ago. Like, maybe the university was great back then, and maybe it is a joke now. But yeah, it really does feel like, well, we have this basic plot. How are we going to stretch this up to be a feature-length film? So let's really stretch it out. Let's have a courtroom scene. And like you said, like, David Duchovny is played as, like, you know, I used to be somebody, and then I, you know, because of something that I did, like, I made a gigantic mistake, and now I'm a nothing in the scientific community. I'm stuck here grading papers. But then, like, she says, you could have gotten your friend killed, and I'm like, yeah, you did almost get Orlando Jones killed. Orlando Jones says the black guy dies first, and David Duchovny says, no, you'll be fine. Go ahead and grab that bug. And then, like, I mean, that bug doesn't kill Orlando Jones, but then because they're down there, Orlando Jones gets a bug inside him. So it is David Duchovny's fault. And, like, the movie wants us to be on his side, but also what it's showing us is a lot of, like, bad stuff. Like stuff that he's doing that makes me not be on his side.
Well, that was all I had.
I know this one's been really scatterbrained. I didn't take any notes for this one. We were just kind of... You would say something, and that would make me think of something else, and I think that would make you think of something. But I don't think I hated this one as much as you did. But other than, like, listening to what the creative process was, I don't think that there's any reason I would actually want to watch this again.
Yeah, I didn't hate this movie. But it's one of those things where it's like, if I was going to be, like, completely objective and not have my own, taking a step outside of myself, I would say that maybe this movie's like a 5, but just on, like, a personal taste level, this was like a 4, because this movie is going to evaporate from my brain in a week. So I'm glad I'm recording it this so soon after having watched it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what you are going to choose for us to talk about next time.
All right. Well, I got a big list of potential picks. I have about 20 of them. So, Comics Kid, pick a number between 1 and 20.
17.
17. Oh, this will be interesting, because I'm not going to pick it. I'm going to pick it next time. So I have this list, and as we were talking, I remembered what my next pick was going to be, but I had already made this list. So my pick 2 times from now will be number 17. All right? So okay. You will find that out in 2 episodes' time, or at the end of 2 episodes' time, you will know what number 17 was. But what we're going to do next is a sequel to a movie that we've already covered. I think you might know what it is, Comics Kid. A while back, we talked about the 2005 Fantastic Four movie, and its sequel, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, is on Disney Plus now. So we're going to talk about that because I've never seen it, and I know how much you enjoyed editing the last Fantastic Four movie. And you know what? I know that this is a movie I've never seen before, but I know you have, and I'm sure you have a lot to say about it, and I'm sure that'll spur a big, long discussion that will be a very fun video for you to edit. So that's my pick.
Awesome. I'm excited about that. I'm glad you picked that because I wasn't going to pick it. I was not sure. We may have more to say about it, but I just, in my mind, I was like, I don't know what I will say about it that we haven't already said already, but it could be that since I've only seen it a few times, there may be a whole plethora of stuff that I'll latch onto once I'm watching it. Like, oh yeah, there is this thing that happened in it.
Yeah, if it has more of actors in their mid to late 20s posing like they're college students in photos, I will be very, very happy.
I hope you're looking forward to like a flashback where Ben is like still in thing form, but it's like he's got a hat, a ball cap that's like sideways, and it's like a college flashback, but inexplicably he's the Thing, and he's wearing shorts, and he's like, hey, let's go, we're gonna raid the sorority, but he's doing like the Thing voice. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh my god,
wouldn't that be great?
That would. I'm kind of sad that you were only joking now. So thanks for that. But yeah, if any of the listeners need a reminder, that is in part written by Mark Frost, who is the co-creator of Twin Peaks.
Yeah, and that's the thing I'm most curious about because, like, well, we'll talk about that next time. So in the meantime, unless you have anything else, Connor, I am the Comics Kid 2099.
And I'm Connor Nielsen.
And we'll see you guys in the future. Have a good one.
Bye.